So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our talk this evening with Esther Janssen. My name is Ellen Mara de Wachter, and I'm a writer based in London. And I met Esther earlier this year when I was invited to write a text about her work for her exhibition at Unit London. And since then, Esther and I have had several very long conversations on the phone about her work and where her work leads us to different thoughts and different ideas about the world. So I'm really delighted to be back in conversation with you, Esther. So as I mentioned, I'm in London. Esther, tell us where you are.
I'm in Maastricht, which is the south of the Netherlands, or Holland, as is a more popular name.
Brilliant. We're going to have Francesca from Unit taking us through several images as we go along. And the plan today is for Esther and I to be in conversation for about half an hour. And then we'll have some time for questions from anyone here in attendance. So please do type your questions in the chat box, or even save them for later. If you want to ask them, you can then, I guess, unmute yourself perhaps at that point. But we'll start by looking at the work in the presentation and with a few questions for you, Esther. So your work is a quite unusual material and technique. Can you tell us what it is and perhaps a bit about how you came to work in this quite unusual way?
Yeah, well, the material I mostly work in is artificial leather. It's actually mimicking real leather. So it's like a plastic version of leather. It has a skin imprint, so it really looks like skin also. And I actually came about it by chance when I was graduating from the academy. I bumped into it in a discount store, and there was this real big roll of flashy pink fake leather, and it drew my attention. I had no idea what to do with it, but I just knew I had to have it. And in the end, I made a very big pink sewn leather sculpture for my graduation project. And that's the start of it.
Yeah.
And let me add that the material did immediately have something obscene, and its artificiality and its connotation with real skin, but not being breathable and being a bit suffocating. Those were all components which I immediately recognized, but weren't part of my themes, or they developed partly because of the material and partly because of my subjects also.
Yeah, I mean, what the work that we are seeing tonight, and that's in the exhibition at Unit London at the moment, is really a world away from what one would imagine with this, hot pink or fleshy pink kind of plastic. So what happened then? I mean, it took you a while to figure out how to work with it, didn't it?
That's true. Actually, I started with objects, but objects take up a lot of space. That's one banal motivation. But I've always been, since the beginning, actually my whole life, intrigued by houses, neighborhoods, and gardens. I partly grew up in Belgium, and the Belgians have notoriously fascinating streets and villages with very clean gardens, with a lot of conifers, but all very sharp and neat. And they fascinated me for a long time. I've been photographing them for a long time, and they naturally became a subject in my work really early on, in the form of first digital paintings. So first there was two things alongside each other: digital paintings and the sewn objects. Because sewn objects also, I needed them because I love working with my hands. The hands have such a logic of their own. I couldn't just do the digital screen time working where you see nothing when you pull your laptop, when you close your laptop. And then at one point, I just thought, wouldn't it be great to make sewn paintings? But I didn't have that term yet. I just thought, couldn't I use it 2D? And because I worked a lot with Photoshop, which is using layers, I thought, couldn't I translate those layers I use in Photoshop, which makes it really convenient to determine your composition, because you can keep on moving them. I thought it would be, yeah, one step towards almost like a collage, of course, but doing it in the artificial leather. And that has been a process in itself also, how to paint it, how to attach it. But that's in short the way it works.
Yeah, it's a fascinating result actually that shows sort of evidence of the computerized process, the digital imaging and sliding and moving things around, getting them just right, and also the very artisanal side of the practice. Can you tell us a bit about the physicality of it? You know, how many pieces are you working with, or how do you assemble them? At what point do you paint them, etc.? You know, those kinds of questions.
Okay, yeah. But I always, actually, the digital paintings, I don't make them anymore, but I always use Photoshop to make very elaborate sketch. And that's my base. It's not a blueprint, but it's my starting point. And then I just start on making the base layer of the painting, and I use a finer type of artificial structured leather. Because it's more in the background, but that's the base layer, which sometimes only the air is visible from that layer. Everything is painted, by the way. I don't use the original color. So I start with painting the sky and the floor, or the grass, or the reflection, the black reflection pool. And then I start cutting all the elements and painting them. So they are apart, they are not attached to the base layer yet. And those elements I paint on a rougher.
So this is like the image that we're seeing now on the left, are these different elements before they're put together?
That's true, yeah. And then the plant parts and the trees, they are on a more, sorry, I cannot find a word. The material is rougher, that's all I can say. So you really see the structure of the leather. It really mimics the skin also very clearly, but it also reflects the light in a different way. So it gets a really strange sheen or shine, and that's really adding to the work. It's a bit surreal because of it. And at some point, when all the elements are right, I start to sew them, and that's a very elaborate process, but which I also really love, because it's obviously very meditative. But I also like that sewing is such an ancient technique, and still because I did try to glue with every kind of glue. I tried every more easy attachment, but nothing is better than needle and thread. So, and that takes a long time, but it's also a very important part for me, because it's a very reflective period, and it's very soothing, and it's rewarding. So yeah, I really love that it takes this time. And also for people who see the work from afar, it really looks like a digital work. So when coming closer, seeing the handmade stitches, seeing that it's a craft, that really brings another element. It makes it warmer and more feminine, maybe less harsh, and very timeless also. So I think that's also important.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the works both online, so in as we're seeing them now, and then also in the exhibition. And I think, you know, they're lit with a lot of sensitivity in the exhibition, and you really get some dramatic shadows, because what you've done in some of the paintings is to pull out individual leaves of trees, or individual sort of elements of different works. And the lighting really catches that. So you get this sort of flattening and then expansion into space towards you. When I remember when we were speaking a couple of months ago about the works, and we were talking about sort of what happens when you look at these works, like not just you, but when anyone looks at the works. And I remember we discussed this question of, when you spend time looking at the work, does your world get bigger, or does your world get smaller? Or does it first get smaller and then bigger? And I mean, do you want to say anything about that? Or I mean, it's different for each person, I think, but since you spend such a long time, I guess, in this relationship where you're kind of bent working on it, sort of looking at it very closely, what happens to you when you spend all that time in these places, essentially?
Actually, they are the spaces that I think they are psychological spaces as well. And I really like, you say near and far, and I'm very close to them. But actually the near and the far, so the very intimate setting because of the trees that are surrounding you, but at the same time the very depth of caused by the gradients, or because there's no horizon, or that's actually a thing I'm really after, because I consider a perfect space one that is both secure and dramatic, but also mysterious. So it should have this infinite aspect, but at the same time this enclosure, because I think that it's I've often heard that when we were cave people, that was sort of our ideal setting. We were safe in the cave and we could look at this really big land, and we don't have that anymore in our cities. Space is the most luxurious thing we can have nowadays. And for me, these are substitute spaces that also have to do with my own. Yes, I have a very big sensitivity to space, and so they sort of represent my ideal space.
That's so fascinating about that evolutionary predisposition to wanting something up behind you to protect, and then to look out. So maybe we can move to the neighborhoods, so there are different series in your work. So some of them, like the one that we're looking at, look at gardens or garden spaces or tended, a combination of natural and cultivated. But then there is a whole other series which looks at neighborhoods, and you have one right behind you, actually, in your studio. And they're fascinating kind of areas, and they connect with the garden paintings in the sense that they're highly determined by human design, and at the same time, there's never any people in them, although they in themselves constitute pure evidence of people's involvement or people's manipulation of materials. How did these highly kind of meticulously designed areas become of interest to you? And you said you photographed neighborhoods, but could you tell us a bit more about which ones in particular and why you were interested?
Yeah, I already mentioned the Belgian village. That's actually really where it started, but then the internet came and I could travel the whole world through Google Maps. So I spent a lot of time on that. And actually, the more I spent time on it and the more cities over the whole world I would look, I saw so many similarities. It seemed like there was a standardization, and that started to capture my attention. So the conifers, the shaped bushes, the really, really smooth lawns. It's such a universal image, actually. All the suburbs, they all seem to long for the same echo of paradise or small Versailles. It's sometimes very endearing, sometimes a bit sad, because it's like a very, very sad echo with one conifer. But still, you can tell people really long to create their own paradise, no matter how it ends up looking. But that was really something that struck me. There's a lot of attention and love for their own gardens, but it's also strange in this individual lifetime that the standardization is very present. So that's an aspect actually I started to use, because it made me realize if I use these returning subjects, also the hedges that surround the garden, that fence it will also enclose it, so it's safe for the people who are in there, but sort of hostile for the people on the outside. I thought if I take these specific elements that I really started to notice are everywhere, then I can maybe build with them new spaces, fictitious spaces that still have a universal recognition, because they are everywhere, and that's actually also what's happening. So to me, that's a really nice feedback to get when people say, I live here in a completely different part of the world, or of Holland or of Belgium, but it's like you have captured the mood of my neighborhood. And that's actually also what I'm after. It's like this sort of archetypical, it's archetypical in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, they are definitely environments in which because you've created them with this lexicon of shapes or lexicon of design items that's recognizable, people kind of can situate themselves in it. Or I'll speak for myself, because I don't know what other people do, but I can situate myself in it and know where I am, but also have no idea, of course. And because there's that comfort, and I suppose it's the same as this idea of the cave behind you protecting you and the wide open space, my imagination can run free. And so for me, these environments have a great sense of potential in terms of the imaginary, or even, you know, sort of, I don't know, supernatural almost sensation of what might have happened just now before I arrived, or what might happen after I go, or while I'm still there. It's really interesting. Yeah, that's also my intention, is to make those really familiar neighborhoods something special, because we tend to not really see where we live anymore. It's a bit ordinary, but that's the way. When I determine my space and the elements that are in it, after I've determined the composition, I start this really specific process of the lighting. And I use artificial light as I please. I use daylight as I please. I use it together. But I start lighting it like you would light a stage with actors. The elements are the actors, and I light it in such a way that your eyes really cannot sit on in one point. There's a lot of things happening, and that brings attention, but also a magical aspect. And in reality, the light is shifting through the whole day, and colors change all the time. And when you start looking at your own neighborhoods after my work, then it would be fantastic if you can see more beauty, or if you can see those finesse. That's a bit of an aim, actually, also. That the way you describe your lighting process is so dynamic, and it makes me think instantly of cinema, and how you know, the camera, I mean, it is a medium of light, isn't it, cinema, and the camera just follows and moves, and light just enacts the film, really. And we spoke about your cinematic influences. I mean, do you want to say a little bit about different films or different directors whose work has influenced you or affected you?
Yeah, certainly. I was 14 when I saw Twin Peaks by David Lynch, and I was spooked by it. But I'm a really big David Lynch fan, and I think he is a master, and with very, very little means, he can create such a threatening atmosphere. Although you're looking at a lovely garden or a very modernist house, so he can create within a space with a few elements very, very well done, and a bit of sound. Such a big tension, such big tension, and that really, really stuck with me. That's something I think I took from him as a very powerful effect of something you normally conceive as a peaceful location. Or I think that really influenced me. And what I also really liked about David Lynch is when he talked about his films, he himself is at his happiest when he makes his own props for the houses. So he's actually in the workshop making little cupboards in an off shape, or so he also has this crafty side, which is a big element for him. So he really builds his own sets in a sense, and knows very well what he's doing and what the effects are.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about the prop making, but that really resonates with your world and your work, you know, the way you're building these worlds from scratch. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that also leads me to think about, you know, a little bit more biographically about yourself and the fact that you come from a family of artists. And I was curious about how you think that has influenced your work, or whether it's had a particular steering effect. Like, has it put you down certain paths, or given you a sensibility, do you think?
Yeah, it cannot be otherwise, because I grew up in an artist family. Both my mother, my father, my grandfather, and also the new wife of my father, they are all artists. So it was actually as naturally available as a chair and a table. So much so that I couldn't really tell what art was. It was just there. But my father is a painter, and he also made woodcuts, and I also sometimes helped him when I was in high school. So I could really see how he built up his own images by using each time a layer with the woodcut and ink. And he definitely did something that also Hokusai and Hiroshige used, the gradients for the sky, which give depth, but he also built spaces, suggestive spaces through hard cut shadows. And I am 100% influenced by that. It cannot be otherwise, because I already like that at a young age. I like that really powerful aspect of the contrast in his works.
I think that is very present and in your work, that ability to do something so soft as, you know, the way you might paint the grass, or just the sky, or the way light operates, and so sharply cut as the edge. And this is a great picture to kind of look at with this, is a close-up from one of your disaster works, and where you can really see the different textures of artificial leather that you're working with. There's a broad range of different textures, and also the way you're in one part extremely controlling. So with the tiles on the roof, you're very, very precise and controlling. And in another part, you're allowing it to kind of explode outwards. Can you tell us more about this disaster series? And it seems in some ways quite a contrast to the gardens or the neighborhoods, but in other ways there are similarities.
Yeah, it's also because they are from an earlier stage. They are 2011, 2012. And that's actually that's when I made the transition from objects to sewn paintings. But at that time, when I was making those objects and the sewn paintings, there's a lot of scrap material, and there were a lot of disasters on television. And actually, I saw this parallel. My studio with all those how do you say that, the fabric
Offcuts.
that was lying around. Sorry?
Offcuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it mimicked a bit of the images of the collapsed world, and I thought maybe I could parallel that in that painting technique. At the same time, I also noticed the whole broadcasting of live disaster. Nowadays, they do it more demure. They don't do it such not live now. So many killed. It's different now, but at that time, it really struck me as very unethical almost, especially because they give it a lot of attention, and then suddenly it stops, and you don't know what happens next to those people, to those places. While knowing the aftermath is really painful and long. And I thought, what would happen if I stick to that subject and start showing those disasters? How would that feel? How would it feel to have to work with such a theme? And that was actually the reason why I started doing it.
And for me, it's very interesting to see that you have chosen settings that are in a way representative of an international like luxury market, or an international modernism. These villas, which you can imagine are in maybe in gated communities, or certainly in very privileged environments. and that they are susceptible just as much as anything else to collapse.
Yeah, I think the contrast between our tension, we living in a time where everything seems controllable and makeable and manufacturable, and especially in the West, we have come to such a degree of perfection of everything. And for every item you want to buy, there are thousands variations, and you can buy the best of the best. So this contrast between, also, it doesn't matter where you live. Also now with climate change, you can see disasters are everywhere. But when it hits a more privileged area, the contrast seems even bigger, because, and it's also, it's not that it's worse where it happens. It's as bad for everyone that undergoes this. But I thought visually, and also, yeah, the effect of the modernism versus the collapse is a dramatic one.
Yeah, it's such a powerful symbol. I remember you said something when we spoke before, and you were talking about, and I'm quoting you here. So you said you were interested in the tension between intended design and lived reality, and how, you know, during the design process, one might imagine, or even do fair research, you know, like a fair amount of real research to figure out what the design should be, but that actually the reality of usage or life always brings up something unexpected. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big, sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead.
That indeed is a big theme for me. Yeah, it has to do with everybody dreams, everybody desires certain things, but reality always turns out to be different, and it's often a disappointment. But you always see the intention, and to have to deal with the disillusionment of reality is I think, a very interesting part of life, because if you cannot deal with it, you stick to chasing dreams, and the dreams are so visible in those neighborhoods, in those gardens. You see people's dreams, but you also see the reality of them. And I think that's a very, also a sign of our time, because we think happiness can be made, maybe less now. But yeah, I think that's an interesting collision between reality and wanted design.
And in many ways, the suburbs where you've situated a lot of your works kind of represent this, the kind of tantalizing sort of interestingness of disillusion, because you know they present themselves as very organized and in some ways ordinary, but in some ways, you know, correct, you know. And also you can imagine, you know, the greatest subcultures kind of fomenting under the surface of these suburbs, and that disillusionment, you know, with a bit of time ends up being possibly the best thing that could happen to people, you know, to realize that the fantasy isn't all that wonderful after all.
Yeah. When something is finished, it's usually not interesting anymore. And when you see all those really perfect houses, and it's part of the reason why the artificial ladder is also really working, I think, is because it adds to the suffocating feeling I also want to convey, and also the alienation, because people have built their own paradise, but there's no life in it. People are just inside, or I don't know, it's often very desolate, those spaces, and very protective, very hostile, because in the gated communities you mentioned, how much freedom is there and how much is not set in stone, what are the possibilities when everything is so clear cut and so determined, and everything has to be known. Where is the mystery and the chance?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's very well put. I just want to shift because I think one answer to what the question you've just asked is somehow in your disco series, which we're looking at right now. And the fact that this is quite different in terms of both technique and what we're looking at, the imagery. Do you want to tell us a bit more about these? And obviously the caption says it's on paper. So how did you move into paper or back towards paper?
Yeah, actually that is a very mundane reason, because the sewing is so heavy for the hands that for a while I thought, yeah, I cannot continue it at this pace. I have to try also different media. Also because the sewing is such a slow process that to really experiment or for accidents to happen, I really like to change sometimes with the medium, because then you can get a certain speed that makes different, that makes you discover different ways to build it, to come to an image. And so the paper was a way to work really fast, and that was actually pretty liberating. And it also answered to my desire to get a little more abstraction in my works. So when they don't take as long to make, you can just try. It doesn't matter if it fails. But with the sewn paintings, I cannot just try sewing for 3 months and thinking, no, this isn't it. So that's the reason. The speed is, I think, one of the most important reasons I started switching to different media.
These works are so interesting to me because even though at a glance, they're very dark works, really they are all about light, and that's all that's going on in it. And maybe that's why you've called them disco as well. But yeah. How do you also use the computer with these to create a sketch, or are you just going intuitively?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to make a series of works on a black background, because I really like the effect of when you put a gradient. Everything on this picture goes from color to black. So everything you see is disappearing and appearing at the same time. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect. I really like also the gradient. I really like it because it connects two poles. Instead, it is a spectrum. It's not black or white.
Yeah, not binary.
Everything in between. Yeah, it's not binary. Yeah. And I really like that it sort of comes to you from a depth because it's black. And I really saw how strong the effect was of putting those. Every object I put on it had such a strong working immediately that I could just add small things like. When you look at the left panel, you see the parts of the sky. Putting a small part of sky on it is such a big thing immediately. So I thought, yeah, this is really working. And I just went ahead and just taped different things on it. So those were very organically, without really much of a design.
They're very interesting to see in juxtaposition with the sewn paintings, the artificial leather sewn paintings, because these are rather more flat, but they still, because they're collaged paper, they still have height to them. So, your eyes are used to seeing these contours, and maybe we should specify that the sewn paintings have quite rounded contours, so, and that was visible in the close-up, but the disco works are really flat, and you get that much more almost severe, kind of much more sleek surface, I suppose, in a way with them. Esther, maybe we should turn to questions now. So Francesca is going to let us know if there have been any questions. I noticed there was something in chat which we haven't looked at yet. Treatment of light reminds Aidan of Magritte. I agree as well. In fact, we discussed that, didn't we, Esther?
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and I know Magritte, of course. And it's like I know a lot of artists I also hear a lot of people think it's Rousseau. Yeah. And I know those artists, but it's not that I especially study them. I just recognize, okay, he also has this twilight or this surrealism, but it's not that he is my big influence.
Yeah.
And I really like his imagery, or his his findings. It's it is a very legit parallel, of course.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I can read some more questions that we've got through. So there's one here that says, could you talk about your daily practice, hours in the studio? Do you work with assistants?
Yes, you can actually divide it into two processes. The process of designing it in Photoshop, so that can take a week to sometimes 3 weeks or 4 weeks, that I really search for the composition or for the light, and really it takes a while for something becomes something, and usually you don't really know why and when that happens. But at the moment it happens, I know what direction the work will take. Then I'm ready to start working in the material. That's actually the more monomadic process, because when I'm starting to execute the work, I start at 6 in the morning and I almost cannot stop. It's not that it's without challenge. There's a lot of technical challenges and also a lot of decisions I still make, but that is a very disciplined time. Whereas the design part is a very insecure, and I can procrastinate and don't want to look at what I did yesterday because I think it must still be nothing, or so that takes a lot of effort opposed to the working in the material. And I'm a pretty structured person, yeah. but that must not be a surprise, probably.
We've got another question actually that's a bit connected to that, which is, what is the process of assembly like? Do you have an idea of the final result before you start, or does it evolve and change as you work?
The rough picture is there, but every element I make is more spontaneous. It will turn out the way it turns out. It's not that I design details. I know there has to be a circle, that's pretty open, but once I start to have to determine the trees and the plants, that's more organic, so I don't have them worked out completely. That's really also more a painterly process. I actually always thought I couldn't paint, a childish presumption. But during the years, I noticed that I started painting more and more on the artificial ladder, and suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I can paint, and that opened a lot of more possibilities. What I would paint on the artificial ladder, which made those plants and the flowers actually evolve from that realization.
It's very interesting to look at the works up close, because your eyes are already ready for a challenge, because you're like, is this flat? Is it not flat? And then you figure out that it's got volume and different, ups and downs. But then, as you say, it's painted. So you get into each individual petal of each flower that you have painted one at a time. And so there's such a level of detail, almost like a miniature painting. That's throughout, isn't it?
True.
And we've actually got a question that says, do you plan to return to 3D sculpture work?
Oh, that's a good one. If there comes an opportunity and there is a definite space for it to be shown, I have this fantasy of making a fake leather garden in real life size. that would be a dream. So yes, there definitely will be someday there will be, yeah.
That sounds amazing.
That does sound amazing.
And then there's one that I think you've covered a bit already, but it might be nice to just answer as a direct question, which is, what is the reason behind the complete human absence in your work?
That's a really interesting question. It's never been a conscious decision. I never thought, well, I don't put humans in it. It's just not of my interest. I think also, I already mentioned Hokusai and Hiroshige, and what I really liked about their works is the size of the human is, I think, as it should be in art, very small place in nature. And But I also, I think the absence of humans in the work really adds to the tension and really say something about the alienation and the way we are not really connected to our real environment anymore. We are more connected to our digital environment. We seem to not really be present there. So so humans are not present in my world either.
And then I've got a couple more. There's one that's a bit connected to that. It's as nature is usually seen as uncontrollable, what does it mean to be able to create your own controlled space and environment?
Sorry, I had a visitor. I was completely distracted. Can you read that again?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't get the chance to say hi. So it was, as nature is usually seen as something uncontrollable, what does it mean to be able to create your own controlled space and environments?
It feels really good. Yeah, I think that's really the most honest answer, is that it feels really good to have control over, like I'm saying, to create a space that really answers to my own needs, and that I can really shape it the way I want, in a logic, to answer to my own sense of logic also in the way I work. I can answer in all kinds of ways to my own logic, because as I mentioned, I come from an artist family, and my mother is not practicing artist anymore, but she was from the big gestures, big handwriting. Everything I did was really small, miniature. And she would always critic that, like, be more expressive. And so I always concluded, well, now I'm not an artist. I'm not expressive. I'm not. And it's really, for me, my own work started to take shape when I started to embrace my need to measure and my love for detail. And that's actually a very big part of what makes my work for me, and to really do it my way, in that way. Don't know if that made sense, but yeah.
I think it makes complete sense, and it's very nice to hear you say that, because it's inspiring, you know, for anyone who is attracted to doing something they think they shouldn't be doing, to have that kind of evidence that it's worth it and it can create amazing things.
I think it's the most challenging thing for young artists, to not be distracted by what everybody else is doing, and to really hear the very specificness, to discover what's so very specific of what you're doing yourself. But that's very difficult because it's so close.
Yeah.
So yeah, you sometimes cannot even observe what makes what you're doing special. So yeah, that's a hard trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we maybe do a quick last question, just because it will tie it nicely together, which is what's the reason for the selection of the works that are part of the exhibition?
Well, I think because it's my first show in London and in the UK, I really like to be able to show the process of the different techniques, and the development in the techniques, and the development in the subject matter, while at the same time you see this very clear theme running throughout. So I thought it was almost like not a how do you say that, not a retrospective, but still, like, I'm presenting myself to the UK and to the London public, and they haven't seen any work before. So I thought, yeah, they work together very well. So I thought, why not?
Great, yeah. So the exhibition is going to be on till the 4th of October in our Unit London space in Mayfair. So if anyone hasn't had the chance to see it yet, you've still got a bit of time.
I can just say it's really worth seeing the works in person. They just give you so much more than the pictures already give you, which is already a lot.
They work very well as a picture, but it's
but it's it just becomes a world, and that's where this idea of world building starts to make sense.